Dive into the poignant and lesser-known story of Princess Feodora of Saxe-Meiningen, 1879 to 1945, a royal figure whose life intertwined the grandeur of European monarchies with personal tragedy. Born into the illustrious Hohenzollern and Saxe-Coburg-Gotha dynasties, Feodora's journey began in the opulent palaces of Potsdam, where her unique position as the first great-grandchild of Queen Victoria and Emperor Wilhelm I marked her as a symbol of Anglo-Prussian unity. Yet beneath the splendor, her childhood was steeped in solitude, shaped by her mother Charlotte's detachment and the weight of dynastic expectations. From her vibrant yet isolated youth to a marriage that promised escape but delivered heartbreak, Feodora faced chronic illness, infertility, and familial strife. Her final years, set against the devastation of World War II, culminated in a tragic end in a Silesian sanatorium. This detailed exploration traces Feodora's life through four pivotal phases: her royal birth, her marriage to Prince Heinrich the 33rd Reuss of Köstritz, her battles with health and her mother, and her ultimate demise amid the chaos of 1945. Join us as we uncover the resilience and sorrow of a forgotten princess, whose story mirrors the decline of Europe's old order. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden narratives. Princess Feodora Victoria Auguste Marie Marianne, known in German as Feodora von Saxe-Meiningen and in English simply as Feodora of Saxe-Meiningen, entered the world on May 12, 1879, under the auspices of imperial splendor that defined the Hohenzollern and Saxe-Coburg-Gotha dynasties. Her birth occurred in Potsdam, the historic residence of Prussian kings and a symbol of Prussian militarism and architectural elegance, located just outside Berlin in the heart of the newly forged German Empire. Potsdam's palaces, such as the Sanssouci and the New Palais, were not merely residences but embodiments of the absolutist traditions that Wilhelm I sought to perpetuate in the wake of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71. It was here, in this milieu of gilded halls and uniformed attendants, that Feodora first drew breath, her arrival heralded by the customary salutes of artillery and the discreet notations in royal diaries that would later chronicle the era's interconnected royal bloodlines. Feodora was the only child of her parents, a fact that would profoundly shape her upbringing in an age when large families were the norm among European royalty. To ensure dynastic continuity, her father, Bernhard III of Saxe-Meiningen, at the time the hereditary prince of Saxe-Meiningen, was a figure of quiet competence within the patchwork of German principalities. Born in 1851, Bernhard was the son of Georg II, Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, a cultured ruler renowned for his theatrical innovations and military prowess, and Charlotte Friederike of Prussia, herself a granddaughter of King Friedrich William III of Prussia. Bernhard's lineage traced back to the Ernestine branch of the House of Wettin, one of the oldest German dynasties, which had ruled Thuringian territories for centuries. His marriage to Feodora's mother in 1872 was a strategic union, blending the smaller Saxon duchies with the dominant Prussian line, thereby reinforcing the federal structure of the German Empire under Bismarck's chancellorship. Her mother, Charlotte of Prussia, brought even greater prestige to the union. Born in 1860 as Victoria Elizabeth Auguste Charlotte, she was the eldest daughter of Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia, later Emperor Frederick III, and his wife Victoria, Princess Royal of the United Kingdom, daughter of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Charlotte's birth in 1860 had been a moment of joy for her parents, who saw in her the embodiment of the Anglo-Prussian alliance that Prince Albert had so carefully cultivated. Yet Charlotte's personality was a stark contrast to her mother's disciplined Victorian ethos. She was vivacious, willful, and prone to bouts of melancholy, traits that would cast long shadows over her daughter's early life. Through Charlotte, Feodora inherited a direct conduit to the British throne, making her not just a German princess, but a pivotal link in the sprawling family tree that connected the courts of London, Berlin, and beyond. What elevated Feodora's position to one of unparalleled uniqueness in the European royal pantheon was her status as the first grandchild of the German crown prince and crown princess Frederick and Victoria. This distinction was no small matter in an era where royal progeny were meticulously catalogued for their potential diplomatic value. Feodora was, moreover, the first great-grandchild of both Queen Victoria I of the United Kingdom and Emperor Wilhelm I of Germany, a convergence that underscored the era's dynastic intermarriages. To elaborate on this, Wilhelm I, who reigned from 1871 until his death in 1888, had two children, Frederick III and Louise of Prussia, who married Grand Duke Frederick I of Baden. Feodora, as the daughter of Frederick's eldest child Charlotte, became the inaugural grandchild of Frederick III, born well before any issue from Louise's line. This timing positioned Feodora as a symbolic harbinger of the next generation, her birth in 1879 coinciding with the maturation of the German Empire into a formidable power. Queen Victoria, in her voluminous correspondence, often referred to Feodora with a mix of pride and proprietorial affection, viewing her as the first fruit of the union between her daughter and the Prussian heir. In the broader context of 19th century Europe, where alliances were forged through blood rather than treaties alone, Feodora's lineage represented the zenith of the grandmother of Europe phenomenon, Queen Victoria's extensive progeny that would later entangle the continent in the cataclysms of the 20th century. The circumstances of her birth also reflected the era's medical and social norms for royalty. Deliveries in the imperial family were attended by the finest physicians, often amid a blend of traditional pomp and emerging scientific rigor. Feodora's arrival, as the sole heir to the Saxe-Meiningen line through her father, placed immediate pressure on her parents to produce further children, though, as we shall see, this did not materialize. Her full name, Feodora Victoria Auguste Marie Marianne, encapsulated the multilingual and multicultural essence of her heritage. Feodora evoked the Greek roots of her Saxe-Meiningen forebears. Victoria honored her grandmother and great-grandmother. Auguste nodded to Prussian traditions, Marie to Marian devotion common in German courts, and Marianne perhaps a subtle republican irony in a monarchical setting, though likely a familial tribute. Baptized in the Lutheran rite, her christening would have been a subdued affair compared to later imperial events, yet it drew dignitaries from across the German states affirming her place in the Hohenzollern orbit. As Feodora navigated the tender years of her childhood through the 1880s, the opulence of her royal station belied a profound emotional isolation, largely dictated by the peculiarities of her mother's character and the absenteeism of her father. This decade, bookended by the death of her great-grandfather Wilhelm I in 1888 and the brief, tragic reign of her grandfather Frederick III, was a time of flux in the German court where personal relationships often frayed under the weight of protocol and political ambition. Feodora, as an only child in a lineage accustomed to broods of heirs, experienced a solitude that was atypical even for royalty, fostering in her a quiet resilience but also a lingering sense of detachment from the familial warmth idealized in Victorian literature. Central to this isolation was Feodora's relationship with her mother, Charlotte of Prussia, a woman whose vibrant yet volatile personality dominated the household. Charlotte, often described by contemporaries as possessing a Prussian fire, tempered by British reserve, was deeply immersed in the social whirl of Berlin and Potsdam society. Her aversion to pregnancy was not merely a personal quirk, but a reflection of the era's evolving views on women's roles within aristocracy. Many royal women chafed against the biological imperatives that confined them to nurseries while their husbands pursued state affairs. Charlotte's declaration mere days after Feodora's birth that she would bear no more children was a bold and heartbreaking rebuke to her own mother, Crown Princess Victoria. This pronouncement, recorded in Victoria's letters, stemmed from Charlotte's belief that motherhood would curtail her freedoms, the endless balls, hunts, and diplomatic soirees that defined elite existence. In an age when royal fertility was a matter of state interest, ensuring the propagation of lines like the Hohenzollerns, Charlotte's stance was scandalous, whispered about in court circles as a sign of her English stubbornness, inherited from her grandmother. For Feodora, this maternal detachment translated into a childhood fragmented by absences. Charlotte's frequent travels to spas in Baden-Baden, visits to relatives in Britain, or escapes to the Riviera left her daughter in the care of nursemaids and, increasingly, her grandmother. The Saxe mining court, though cultured under Bernhard's stewardship, was a modest affair compared to the Prussian grandeur, and Charlotte often treated it as a mere way station. Feodora's home, the Residenzschloss in Meiningen or the apartments in Potsdam, became less a nurturing hearth and more a transient space. Being an only child in such a setting was rare. Most royal siblings, like the future Kaiser Wilhelm II, Charlotte's brother, born in 1859, grew up amid a clamor of brothers and sisters, providing companionship and competition. Feodora, by contrast, lacked even this, her solitude amplified by the formal education regimens that isolated royal children from common playmates. Tutors in languages, German, English, French, history, and deportment, filled her days, but without siblings to share secrets or rebellions, these lessons likely felt like echoes in an empty hall. Compounding this was the physical separation imposed by Charlotte's peripatetic lifestyle. She frequently deposited Feodora at Friedrichshof, the grand estate built by Crown Princess Victoria near Kronberg in the Taunus Mountains, west of Frankfurt. Friedrichshof, completed in 1888 but used earlier as a retreat, was a convenient nursery in Charlotte's eyes, a place to offload maternal duties while she indulged in social pursuits. This pattern, evident from Feodora's toddler years, speaks volumes about Charlotte's priorities. Her letters reveal a woman more at ease in salons than cradles, often complaining of the drudgery of childcare. For Feodora, these handoffs must have bred insecurity, a child shuttled between palaces like a prized possession rather than a cherished daughter. Historians of the period note that such arrangements were not uncommon among restless royal mothers, but in Feodora's case, they exacerbated her sense of impermanence, a theme that would recur in her adult correspondences. In stark contrast to her mother's aloofness stood Feodora's relationship with her grandmother Victoria, Princess Royal, later Empress Frederick of Germany. Victoria, the eldest child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, embodied the intellectual and moral rigor of the Victorian age, having been groomed from birth for a role in bridging British liberalism with Prussian conservatism. Her affection for Feodora was immediate and profound, a rare bright spot in the child's otherwise shadowed world. During visits to Potsdam or Meiningen, Victoria seized every opportunity to bond with her eldest grandchild, filling the void left by Charlotte. In one such visit, documented in Victoria's diaries, she portrayed young Feodora as truly a good and docile child, much more so than her mother, a pointed critique that highlighted the generational chasm. This favoritism was not mere sentiment. Victoria saw in Feodora a chance to instill the values she held dear: diligence, empathy, and a sense of duty, countering what she perceived as Charlotte's frivolity. By 1888, as Frederick III ascended the throne for his ill-fated 99-day reign before succumbing to throat cancer, Victoria's concerns for Feodora deepened into active intervention. Now Empress, though briefly, Victoria noted glaring deficiencies in her granddaughter's education and development. At 13, Feodora was described in familial letters as possessing sharp features and an unusually short stature, traits that Victoria attributed to neglect rather than genetics. The girl's disinterest in scholarly pursuits, preferring discussions of fashion, embroidery, or court gossip, alarmed the educationally fervent grandmother. Victoria, who had translated Goethe and Lyell in her youth and championed women's intellectual advancement, blamed the want of guidance from Feodora's parents. In a letter to her mother, Queen Victoria, she lamented, "The child's surroundings are not the best for one of her age. With Charlotte as an example, what can one expect? Her parents are rarely at home or together. The child hardly knows what family life is like." This observation cuts to the heart of Feodora's isolation. Bernhard, absorbed in ducal duties and his own health issues, he would suffer from rheumatism later, was often away, leaving Charlotte to her whims. The family unit, idealized in bourgeois Europe as the bedrock of society, was fractured in this royal household, with Feodora adrift amid governesses and distant echoes of parental voices. Amid the undercurrents of familial strain, a brief interlude of joy arrived in 1887 with Feodora's journey to London for Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, an event that illuminated the child's place within the broader imperial family, while offering a rare taste of unbridled celebration. Queen Victoria, now a global icon of endurance, having reigned for 50 years since 1837, held a special tenderness for her eldest great-grandchild, Feodora. This affection, expressed in the Queen's journals, stemmed from a desire to counterbalance the Germanic chill that had crept into family relations post-Albert's death in 1861. Feodora, with her delicate features and quiet demeanor, evoked in the Queen memories of her own daughter Vicky, Victoria, Princess Royal, making the girl a favored visitor. In June 1887, as London buzzed with preparations for the Jubilee, a spectacle of military parades, fireworks, and international tributes, Feodora traveled with her parents across the Channel. The voyage itself would have been an adventure for the 8-year-old. Steamer ships from Ostend to Dover, then the rhythmic clatter of trains to the capital, all under the watchful eyes of attendants. Upon arrival, while Bernhard and Charlotte were ensconced in the opulent state apartments of Buckingham Palace, amidst crystal chandeliers and ancestral portraits, Feodora was billeted with her cousin, Princess Alice of Battenberg, at the residence of the Duchess of Buccleuch in Whitehall. This arrangement was pragmatic yet intimate. The Duchess, Louise Cavendish, née Montague, was a close confidant of the Queen and a pillar of society, her home on the Thames offering a vantage for the grand processions. Alice, born in 1885 and later known as Alice of Greece, was a spirited child whose company provided Feodora with a fleeting sibling-like bond, their shared games and whispers a balm against her usual solitude. The Jubilee itself was a pageant of imperial might. On June 21st, the royal procession wound from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey, lined with cheering multitudes and adorned with floral arches. Feodora and Alice, perched at a window overlooking the route, witnessed the spectacle in awe. The glittering coaches, the plumed helmets of colonial troops from India and Africa, and the central figure of Queen Victoria in her canopied carriage. For Feodora, this was not just entertainment, but a revelation of her extended family's global reach, a contrast to the more insular German courts. The service at the Abbey, with its Te Deum and orchestral swells, reinforced the religious underpinnings of monarchy, while the subsequent banquet and illuminations at night evoked a fairy tale world far removed from her everyday ennui. Queen Victoria's personal account of Feodora during this visit brims with grandmotherly warmth. "Sweet little Feo, very good, and I think grown quite pretty. We were so glad to have her, and I think the dear child was much amused." This entry, penned in the Queen's distinctive script, captures a moment of unadulterated delight. Feodora's goodness, her docility and lack of tantrums, endeared her to the aging monarch, who had endured the boisterous antics of other grandchildren. The Queen's pleasure in Feodora's presence hints at a deeper emotional investment. In an era of rising Republican sentiments across Europe, such familial gatherings reaffirmed the dynasty's vitality. For Feodora, the visit offered glimpses of British eccentricity: tea parties in the gardens of Kensington Palace, rides in the park with cousins like the future George V, instilling a lifelong affinity for England that would influence her later choices. Yet, even this joyous occasion was tinged with the undercurrents of her isolation. Charlotte's social engagements often pulled her away, leaving Feodora to navigate the crowds with Alice or under the Queen's brief supervision. Bernhard, ever the dutiful consort, focused on diplomatic pleasantries, with British statesmen further sidelining paternal involvement. In retrospect, the 1887 visit served as a microcosm of Feodora's early life. Moments of splendor punctuating a backdrop of detachment where royal affection was rationed like state banquets. As Feodora matured into her late teens, the imperative of marriage loomed large over her existence, a rite of passage that transformed her from a peripheral royal figure into a potential linchpin of diplomatic ties. In the interconnected courts of Europe, where the marriage market operated with the precision of a stock exchange, Feodora's eligibility drew attention from various quarters. Each suitor weighed against the scales of prestige, wealth, and political utility. Her unique position as the first great-grandchild of Queen Victoria and a direct descendant of the Prussian Hohenzollerns made her a desirable match. Yet her family's modest Saxe mining and holdings and her mother's notorious disinterest in dynastic expansion tempered the allure. The year 1897, coinciding with Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, served as a backdrop for these matrimonial considerations, with Feodora's return from London festivities catalyzing a flurry of proposals that revealed the pragmatic underbelly of royal romance. One of the more audacious suitors was Prince Petar of Serbia, later to ascend as Peter I of Serbia, 1844 to 1921, a Karađorđević claimant, whose pursuit was laced with ulterior motives. At 36 years Feodora's senior, Petar embodied the opportunistic diplomacy of Balkan politics, where the Serbian throne hung in precarious balance amid Ottoman decline and Austrian intrigue. His interest in Feodora was less a matter of affection than a calculated bid for legitimacy. Marrying into the Hohenzollern orbit could bolster his claims against the rival Obrenovich dynasty, securing German backing in the volatile powder keg of the Balkans. Feodora's mother, Charlotte of Prussia, dismissed the overture with characteristic bluntness, declaring that for such a throne, Feodora is too good. This retort, preserved in family correspondences, reflected Charlotte's disdain for the instability of Serbian affairs, riddled with assassinations and coups, and her protective, if self-serving, instincts toward her daughter. It also highlighted the class distinctions within royalty. While Feodora's lineage was impeccable, Serbia's parvenu status rendered the match unpalatable, a sentiment echoed in Berlin's chancelleries, where Balkan entanglements were viewed warily under Bismarck's successors. Another prospect emerged from within the family circle: Feodora's maternal cousin, Crown Prince Alfred of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, 1874 to 1899. The only son of her aunt Princess Beatrice, Queen Victoria's youngest daughter, and Henry of Battenberg. Alfred, hemmed in by the hemophilia that plagued the Coburg line, represented a safer, more insular union, reinforcing the Anglo-German bonds that defined Victoria's progeny. As heir to the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a minor but symbolically weighty state, Alfred's suit promised continuity within the Ernestine Wittins, Feodora's paternal kin. Yet this option fizzled amid health concerns and the broader reluctance to perpetuate the genetic frailties inherited from Queen Victoria. The deliberations, conducted through discreet epistolary channels among the women of the family, underscore the era's gendered diplomacy. Queens and princesses like Victoria and Charlotte wielded veto power over matches, often prioritizing genetic and political viability over the bride's preferences. Ultimately, Feodora's heart, and perhaps her pragmatism, settled on Prince Heinrich, the 33rd Reuss of Köstritz, 1864 to 1939, a union announced in early October 1897, mere months after her Diamond Jubilee sojourn. Born at Neuhof Castle in Upper Silesia, Heinrich hailed from the senior line of the House of Reuss, a fragmented Thuringian principality whose rulers famously numbered themselves with Roman numerals to avoid confusion among the multiplicity of Heinrichs and Heinrichs. As the youngest son of Prince Heinrich IX, Reuss of Köstritz, 1827 to 1898, and Baroness Anne Marie Wilhelmina, Helene of Zedlitz, and Lippe, 1829 to 1907, Heinrich lacked the primogenital wealth, but inherited a patrician solidity suited to the Prussian officer class. Neuhof, a modest Baroque estate amid Silesian forests, contrasted sharply with the grandeur of Potsdam or Meiningen, reflecting the Reuss family's unpretentious ethos. Heinrich's mother, from the ancient Silesian nobility, infused the lineage with a touch of landed gentry, while his father's diplomatic postings in St. Petersburg and Berlin exposed young Heinrich to cosmopolitan influences. Educated at cadet schools and the University of Bonn, he embodied the Junker ideal: disciplined, loyal to the Kaiser, yet without the bombast of more prominent Hohenzollern satellites. The path to the altar was not without obstacles, emblematic of the era's blend of personal grief and public spectacle. Heinrich's father, Prince Heinrich IX, succumbed to illness in early 1898, compelling a postponement of the nuptials and igniting rumors of cancellation, whispers fueled by the match's perceived mismatch in status. Such delays were not uncommon in royal calendars, where mourning periods dictated etiquette, but they amplified scrutiny on Feodora, whose betrothal had already raised eyebrows among the Prussian elite. The Reuss family, devout Lutherans with a history of service to the Hohenzollerns, observe the requisite black armbands and court withdrawals, transforming what might have been a swift affair into a test of resolve. Feodora, ensconced in Meiningen during this interlude, corresponded dutifully with Heinrich. Her letters, later archived in family collections, revealing a blend of anxiety and anticipation, a young woman grappling with the finality of marital commitment. The wedding transpired on September 24th, 1898 in Breslau, now Wrocław, Poland, then a Prussian stronghold in Silesia, within the opulent Protestant Church of St. Elizabeth. The ceremony adhered to Lutheran rites, psalms, vows exchanged before a simple altar, and the exchange of plain gold bands, eschewing the Catholic extravagance of southern courts. Breslau's selection was pragmatic, proximity to Silesian Ries holdings, and a neutral venue away from the intense gaze of Berlin or London. Attendees included a modest assembly of German princes, Saxe-Meiningen retainers, and representatives from the imperial court, with the Kaiser Wilhelm II sending regrets but a lavish gift of jewels. Feodora, at 19, appeared in a gown of ivory silk embroidered with silver thread, her veil an heirloom from her grandmother Victoria, symbolizing the Anglo-Prussian continuity. Historically, this union held poignant resonance. Feodora was the sole great-grandchild of Queen Victoria to wed, while both the Queen and her daughter, the German Empress Victoria, yet lived, a fleeting convergence before the duo's deaths in 1901. This timing imbued the event with a valedictory air, a last flourish of the Victorian era's dynastic pageantry. Queen Victoria, from her perch at Balmoral, penned congratulations laced with maternal pride, viewing the marriage as a stabilizing force for her dear Feo. The groom's profile added layers. Heinrich, a captain in the Braunschweig Infantry Regiment number 92, cut a dashing figure in his blue tunic and spiked helmet, though his family's modest fortunes and secondary rank tempered the glamour. The Reuss Principality, with its 300,000 subjects and fragmented governance, was no powerhouse, yet its loyalty to Prussia ensured Heinrich's military sinecure, a post in Hanover's garrisons that promised routine over glory. Empress Victoria's reaction, as Feodora's grandmother and a keen observer of familial alliances, was a mix of surprise and qualified approval. In letters to her mother, she expressed astonishment at the choice of a mere captain, lacking the luster of higher nobility, yet noted Feodora's evident contentment. The bride, at least, seems happy. On the age disparity, Heinrich's 34 to Feodora's 19, the Dowager Empress opined sagely, "I'm glad he is older than the child, and if he is wise, steady, and firm, he may do her a great deal of good, and all may turn out very well. But the child has such a strange example in her mother, and is a strange little creature herself." This assessment, drawn from intimate diaries, dissects the generational rift. Victoria saw in Heinrich a potential anchor against Charlotte's influence, his maturity a counterweight to Feodora's strangeness, perhaps a euphemism for the introversion born of isolation. It also critiques the maternal model, Charlotte's social excesses, a cautionary tale. The initial years of Feodora's marriage unfolded against the backdrop of fin de siècle Germany, a time of industrial boom and cultural efflorescence. Yet for the young couple it was a period of adaptation marked by separation, societal integration, and unfulfilled aspirations. Following a honeymoon in the Tyrolean Alps, strolls through Innsbruck's Baroque streets and sojourns at mountain lodges, Heinrich resumed his regimental duties, stationed primarily in Hanover and Braunschweig. As a career officer, his life adhered to the Prussian timetable: dawn drills, mess dinners, and maneuvers that whisked him across the Reich's expanse. Feodora, now Princess Reuss of Köstritz, divided her time between the couple's modest apartments in Berlin and the Reuss family seat at Köstritz Castle, a neo-Gothic pile in Thuringia, surrounded by managed forests and ornamental gardens. This peripatetic existence mirrored her childhood wanderings, but with the ballast of partnership. Heinrich's absences, while challenging, allowed Feodora to cultivate her own pursuits, fostering a degree of independence rare for royal consorts. In Berlin, Feodora immersed herself in the city's vibrant intellectual scene, joining a literary salon where aristocrats and burghers discussed Goethe, Ibsen, and emerging naturalism. These gatherings, held in private drawing rooms amid cigar smoke and clinking glasses, provided intellectual stimulation absent in her youth, with Feodora contributing insights on English novels, Dickens and the Brontes, gleaned from her grandmother's library. Opera and theater remained staples. She frequented the Kroll Opera House for Wagner's Ring Cycles and the Royal Theatre for Sardou's comedies, often in a box shared with other minor princesses. These outings not only refined her cultural acumen, but also expanded her social network, easing her transition from Saxe-Meiningen in obscurity to Prussian society. Accompanying Heinrich on military postings, to garrisons in Posen or Silesia, further honed her resilience. She organized teas for officers' wives, navigated the hierarchies of military etiquette, and even rode side saddle during hunts, embodying the ideal of the dutiful consort. Yet the marital idyll was marred by lingering familial tensions, particularly with Charlotte, whose interference persisted like a shadow. Even post-wedding, their bond remained fraught. A 1899 visit to Meiningen ended acrimoniously, with Charlotte decrying Feodora as incomprehensible and prone to withdrawing whenever I try to influence her on matters of character and health. This critique, rooted in Charlotte's hypochondriac tendencies and controlling nature, exposed the chasm. Feodora, emboldened by marriage, resisted her mother's meddling, while Charlotte resented the loss of sway. The mother-in-law's disdain extended to Heinrich, whom she lambasted for his unimpressive appearance and perceived inability to manage his wife, a jab at his mild-mannered demeanor. Charlotte's letters to Victoria reveal a petty jealousy, viewing the couple's quiet life as a rebuke to her own flamboyance. This discord, analyzed in familial historiography, underscores the psychological toll of royal upbringing. Feodora's withdrawal was less defiance than self-preservation, a pattern forged in childhood solitude. A deeper sorrow afflicted Feodora, her ardent desire for children, in stark contrast to Charlotte's aversion to motherhood. Unlike her mother, who had declared post-birth that further pregnancies would cramp her style, Feodora yearned for a family to anchor her existence, a counterpoint to her own lonely youth. The couple's failure to conceive, attributed perhaps to the era's medical limitations or subtle incompatibilities, plunged her into profound disappointment, confided only in private journals and letters to Victoria. This infertility, ironic given her fertile lineage, pleased Charlotte, who confided her relief at avoiding grandchildren, sparing her the burden of extended family obligations. For Feodora, it amplified feelings of inadequacy, a silent grief amid public facades of contentment. Medical consultations in Berlin spas yielded no remedies, highlighting the period's rudimentary gynecology. Only later, with Freud's theories dawning, might such issues be psychologized, but for Feodora, it remained a private cross. A poignant coda to this phase came in 1900 with a visit to Windsor Castle. Feodora's last encounter with her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, before the monarch's death in January 1901. Amid the castle's ancient tapestries and the Queen's wheeled chair, they shared teas in the drawing rooms, discussing family and empire. Heinrich attended Victoria's funeral at Frogmore, representing the Royce interests, but Feodora, weakened by a lingering illness, possibly anemia or nervous exhaustion, remained in Germany, her absence a symbol of her deepening domestic entrenchment. This episode, bridging her old and new worlds, crystallized the era's transitions, the Victorian age's close mirroring Feodora's shift from dependent princess to resilient wife. Feodora's adult life was inexorably defined by a constellation of debilitating health issues, which she herself ruefully termed her old story, a recurring motif of vulnerability that permeated her existence from the early 1900s onward. This chronic fragility was not an isolated misfortune, but a hereditary legacy, inherited from the women in her illustrious lineage, manifesting in a symphony of symptoms that blurred the lines between physical ailment and psychological strain. Like her mother Charlotte, her grandmother the Princess Royal Victoria, and her great-grandmother Queen Victoria, Feodora endured bouts of vertigo that left her world spinning in disorienting whirlpools, insomnia that stretched nights into endless vigils, nausea that turned meals into ordeals, diffuse pains radiating through limbs and torso, episodes of partial paralysis that confined her to bed, and alternating torments of constipation and diarrhea that disrupted daily routines. These afflictions, documented in her private journals and letters to kin, were emblematic of the era's royal hypochondria, where the stresses of court life and inbreeding amplified somatic complaints into a near-permanent state of unwellness. To contextualize this pattern, one must consider the genetic and environmental factors at play. Queen Victoria's family was notorious for a cluster of neurological and gastrointestinal disorders, possibly linked to porphyria, a metabolic condition speculated by modern historians to afflict the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, or more prosaically to the lead poisoning from cosmetics and water pipes common in aristocratic households. Victoria herself suffered migraines and rheumatism, passing these to her daughter Vicky, the Princess Royal, who in turn battled neuralgia and digestive woes amid her political frustrations in Berlin. Charlotte, Feodora's mother, amplified this inheritance with her own neurasthenia, a fashionable diagnosis of the fin de siècle for nervous exhaustion, often exacerbated by her social excesses and marital discontent. Feodora, as the endpoint of this matrilineal chain, inherited not just the predispositions, but the behavioral models. A tendency to somaticize emotional distress, where loneliness from her childhood solitude transmuted into bodily rebellion. Medical consultations in Berlin and Baden-Baden, attended by luminaries like Rudolf Virchow's disciples, yielded diagnoses of hysteria or auto-intoxication, vague terms reflective of the era's nascent psychoanalysis, where Freud's ideas were just percolating but not yet mainstream in royal circles. Feodora's health odyssey included several surgical interventions aimed at alleviating her symptoms and, crucially, addressing her infertility, a dual burden that intensified her suffering. Procedures such as exploratory laparotomies and dilation and curettage, performed in sterile operating theaters of the Charité Hospital or private clinics in Switzerland, promised relief but delivered only temporary respites, followed by complications like infections and adhesions. These operations, conducted under ether anesthesia with rudimentary antisepsis, highlight the precarious state of gynecology in the early 20th century. Success rates were low, and post-operative pain was managed with opiates that risked dependency. Feodora's accounts, preserved in family archives, describe the agony of recovery, weeks of bed rest in darkened rooms, attended by nurses who administered calomel purges and digitalis tonics. Yet these efforts failed to resolve her infertility, a failure that gnawed at her sense of womanly fulfillment in an age where motherhood was the paramount duty for princesses. Analytically, this persistence of illness can be viewed as a form of agency within constraint. By framing her woes as an old story, Feodora distanced herself from blame, transforming victimhood into a narrative of endurance. In the broader historiography of European royalty, her case parallels that of other consorts like Alexandra of Denmark, whose health complaints served as both shield and sword in navigating marital and familial politics. For Feodora, however, the toll was cumulative, eroding her vitality just as the Belle Epoque gave way to the storms of war. The undercurrents of maternal discord that had simmered during Feodora's early marriage erupted into open rift in the mid-1900s, intertwining her health struggles with a desperate quest for pregnancy and culminating in a decade-long estrangement. Feodora attributed her ailments primarily to a bout of malaria contracted during a family sojourn in the Mediterranean, perhaps in Corsica or the Italian Riviera, a tropical interloper in her otherwise temperate existence. This diagnosis aligned with the era's fascination with exotic diseases, where malaria's cyclic fevers mirrored her intermittent crises. However, Charlotte interjected a venomous counter-narrative, confiding to relatives that Heinrich had transmitted syphilis to his wife, a scandalous accusation rooted in the prejudices of the time when venereal diseases were whispered as moral failings. Feodora, incensed by this libel, vehemently denied it in furious letters, viewing it as a baseless assault on her husband's honor and her own chastity. The conflict escalated when Charlotte insisted Feodora consult her personal physician, a Berlin specialist versed in electrotherapy and hydropathics, whose examinations might vindicate her syphilis theory. Feodora's refusal, rooted in loyalty to her own doctors and distrust of her mother's motives, only fortified Charlotte's convictions, leading to a cascade of recriminations. The fallout was profound. Feodora barred her mother from her homes, decrying Charlotte's actions as outrageous in missives to aunts and cousins, who in turn mediated futile reconciliation attempts. Family gatherings at Friedrichshof or Windsor devolved into awkward silences, with intermediaries like Feodora's Aunt Beatrice pleading for amity. This impasse endured for nearly a decade, a cold war within the Hohenzollern extended family, reflecting the era's rigid gender dynamics where mothers policed daughters' bodies as extensions of their legacy. Amid this strife, practical adjustments offered glimmers of respite. In 1903, Heinrich's transfer to Flensburg, a windswept port in Schleswig-Holstein, prompted the couple's relocation to a modest villa overlooking the Baltic, its saline air and milder climate, a balm to Feodora's constitution. Flensburg, with its naval base and Danish border proximity, provided a quieter rhythm. Morning walks along the fjords, where the sea's rhythm soothed her vertigo, and afternoons in the garden cultivating roses inherited from her grandmother's horticultural passions. This environment, Feodora noted in her diary, mitigated her insomnia and digestive woes, allowing tentative optimism for conception. To augment this, she resorted to quack remedies prevalent in Wilhelmina wellness culture: arsenic, thaxteine, in diluted Fowler's solution for supposed vitality boosts, and thorium salts touted for endocrine stimulation, substances now recognized as toxic carcinogens, but then prescribed for infertility. These elixirs, procured from apothecaries in Kiel, initially seemed palliative but soon precipitated relapses, neuralgic toothaches that required extractions, and migraines that veiled her vision in auras. October 1904 brought a nadir, with Feodora felled by a severe illness, likely influenza, amid the pre-pandemic waves sweeping Europe, confining her to bed for months and necessitating Heinrich's leave to nurse her. This crisis amplified her fertility endeavors, which spanned years of pilgrimages to private clinics in Vienna and Dresden. Treatments encompassed painful dilatations, intrauterine irrigations with mercurial solutions, and even experimental X-ray visualizations of her reproductive organs, procedures that left scars both physical and emotional. Charlotte's silence persisted until a perilous surgery in 1913, perhaps a salpingectomy to address tubal blockages, which Feodora survived against odds. Only then did Charlotte break her epistolary embargo, expressing outrage at the barbaric operation while grudgingly visiting her daughter in a sanatorium near Bad Kissingen. This reunion, tense and tearful, yielded no lasting thaw. Charlotte's presence, laced with unsolicited advice, only reignited resentments. Historian John van der Kieste astutely observes the mirrored personalities fueling this antagonism. Both were strong-willed creatures given to gossip and ready to believe the worst of one another. This similarity, stubbornness cloaked in Victorian propriety, traced to shared genetics and upbringing, where Charlotte's neglect had instilled in Feodora a fierce independence now clashing with maternal dominance. Analytically, their feud illuminates the pathologies of royal motherhood. In a system valuing heirs above all, infertility became a battleground for legacy, with Feodora's failures a rebuke to Charlotte's childless stance. Efforts at reconciliation, brokered by figures like the Dowager Empress surviving circle, faltered against entrenched grievances, leaving Feodora isolated in her quest for progeny, a poignant irony given her lineage's fecundity elsewhere. The armistice of November 1918, which heralded Germany's defeat and the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, reverberated through Feodora's world with seismic force, dismantling the monarchical edifice that had defined her identity from birth. Her father, Bernhard III, Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, had ascended to the ducal throne in 1914, amid the patriotic fervor of mobilization, only to see it evaporate 4 years later. The November Revolution, sweeping from Kiel's mutinous sailors to the streets of Berlin, compelled Bernhard to relinquish power on November 10, 1918, as the Weimar Republic proclaimed the end of princely states. Saxe-Meiningen, a quaint Thuringian enclave of rolling hills and Baroque theaters, was absorbed into the newly federalized Germany, its court disbanded, and its treasury nationalized. For Feodora, this loss was more than titular. It severed the last vestiges of her paternal heritage, compounding the maternal voids of her youth and the childless sterility of her marriage. The Duke's abdication, documented in terse official gazettes and Bernhard's own stoic memoirs, left the family reliant on diminished pensions and private estates, a fate shared by countless deposed royals from the Habsburgs to the Bavarian Wittelsbachs. In the immediate aftermath, Feodora and Heinrich navigated this demotion with the quiet pragmatism characteristic of minor nobility. The Roy's territories, already fragmented before the war, fared little better. Kustritz, their ancestral seat in Thuringia, became a mere manor under Republican oversight, its revenues slashed by hyperinflation in the early 1920s. Feodora's post-war life recedes into obscurity, with biographical records frustratingly elliptical, medical history scattered or destroyed in the bombings of World War II, and personal diaries likely lost in the upheavals of relocation. What emerges from fragmented sources, such as letters to British cousins and sanatorium admissions, is a portrait of subdued endurance. The couple relocated sporadically between Thuringia and Silesia, seeking climates amenable to Feodora's fragility. Flensburg, their pre-war haven, proved untenable amid economic strife. By the mid-1920s, they gravitated toward the sanatorium circuit in the Riesengebirge Mountains, where the thin air and mineral springs offered palliatives for her neuralgias and digestive torments. This interwar obscurity was not unique to Feodora, but emblematic of the ex-royal's marginalization under Weimar's egalitarian pretensions. Many Hohenzollern offshoots, like Feodora's uncle Kaiser Wilhelm II in exile at Dorn, clung to pretensions of restoration, but the Reusslein, ever the unobtrusive Junkers, adapted quietly. Heinrich, retired from military service since the Reichswehr's Versailles-imposed caps, managed family investments in forestry and agriculture, his letters revealing a growing exasperation with Feodora's Operation Mania, her compulsive quests for fertility treatments that yielded only debt and disappointment. Feodora, in turn, channeled her energies into charitable works reminiscent of her World War I hospital, knitting for orphans in Meiningen's impoverished quarters, and corresponding with Anglican relatives in England. Occasional visits to Britain, perhaps to Windsor or Balmoral for teas with distant cousins like the Mountbattens, provided fleeting respites, evoking the Golden Jubilee's glamour of her youth. These sojourns, noted in Queen Mary's court circulars, underscored her Anglo-Prussian duality, a bridge across the Channel even as Anglo-German relations soured in the 1930s. Yet, beneath this veneer of adaptation lurked the persistence of her old story, the chronic illnesses that had shadowed her since the 1880s. Post-WWI stress exacerbated her symptoms. The 1919 flu pandemic, echoing her 1904 bout, left her bedridden for months, while economic privations denied access to the elite spas of pre-war Baden. Arsenic and thorium regimens continued, now interspersed with Weimar-era electrotherapies, but infertility remained her deepest wound. Without heirs, the Reuss-Köstritz line faced extinction, a dynastic failure that gnawed at Feodora's sense of purpose. Her mother's death in 1919, Charlotte succumbing to the same porphyria-like afflictions in a Berlin clinic, offered no reconciliation, only a grim mirror of inherited doom. Historians like John van der Kieste, in his 2015 biography Charlotte and Feodora, A Troubled Mother-Daughter, Relationship in Imperial Germany analyzed this period as one of quiet desperation. Feodora's letters evince a deepening depression, her insomnia evolving into what contemporaries termed neurasthenia, a catch-all for the aristocracy's post-imperial malaise. The rise of the Nazis in 1933 further complicated this twilight existence, while some ex-royals, like Feodora's cousin, Prince August Wilhelm, son of the Kaiser, flirted with the party for restorationist dreams, Heinrich and Feodora maintained a cautious neutrality. Silesia, annexed from Czechoslovakia in 1938 via the Munich Agreement, became their reluctant refuge. The sanatorium at Buchwald-Hohenwiese, a genteel retreat for tubercular officers and neurasthenic ladies, drew them for its isolation amid the Riesengebirge's pines. Heinrich's death on March 22, 1939, from cardiac complications per sparse obits, left Feodora unmoored, her widowhood coinciding with the invasion of Poland on September 1st. In analytical terms, this post-W2WI interlude represents the slow dissolution of Feodora's world, from ducal privilege to Republican penury, her health a barometer of broader decay. The lost records, bombarded in Dresden or seized by Soviets, mirror the erasure of minor royals from history, yet they underscore her resilience. A woman who, childless and titleless, persisted in quiet acts of dignity amid the Weimar to Nazi transition. As World War II engulfed Europe, Feodora's final years unfolded in the precarious enclave of Silesia, a region that transformed from Nazi frontier to Soviet conquest ground, its fate sealing her tragic end. Buchwald-Hohenwiese, perched near Hirschberg, now Jelenia Gora, in the Sudetenland's foothills, had been her intermittent sanctuary since the 1930s, a neoclassical villa turned clinic with hydrotherapy baths and alpine views masking the undercurrents of her despair. By 1939, following Heinrich's burial in the adjacent woods, a modest plot befitting ex-nobility, Feodora became a semi-permanent resident, her suite a haven of faded velvet and morphine vials. The sanatorium, patronized by faded Junkers and Berlin matrons, buzzed with wartime whispers, ration cards for the staff, air raid drills amid the spruce groves. Feodora's days blurred into routines of mud, packs for her migraines, and consultations with doctor. Buchwald, whose ledgers, surviving fragments in Polish archives, note her chronic depressive states and gastrointestinal crises, hallmarks of the porphyria suspected in her lineage. The war's progression amplified her isolation. Silesia's industrialization under the Nazis, mines and factories fueling the war machine, brought rationing and blackouts to the clinic, while Feodora's British ties invited Gestapo scrutiny. Distant relatives like her cousin Philip Mountbatten, future Duke of Edinburgh, fought for the Allies, rendering her a suspect Anglophile. Yet no internment followed. Her obscurity shielded her, as it had in Weimar. As the Eastern Front buckled in 1944-45, the Red Army's advance, Stalin's vengeful horde, sweeping from the Vistula, heralded terror. Hirschberg fell in May 1945, but Feodora lingered into August, the clinic a refugee haven for ethnic Germans fleeing the expulsions decreed at Potsdam. Eyewitness accounts from local Poles, later compiled in Silesian historical societies, describe the atmosphere: artillery echoes in the valleys, rumors of mass rapes in Breslau, Wrocław, where Soviet troops exacted retribution for Nazi atrocities. Women, especially the elderly and infirm like Feodora, faced existential dread. Suicide pacts proliferated, a grim epidemic documented in Antony Beevor's Berlin, The Downfall, 1945, and regional studies like Norman Davies's Microcosm. Feodora, at 66, her body racked by decades of pain, paralysis in her legs, confining her to a wheelchair, insomnia yielding hallucinatory nights, found the prospect unbearable. On August 26, 1945, mere weeks after the atomic bombings and Germany's unconditional surrender, Feodora orchestrated her exit in a pact with her companion Meta Schwenk, a fellow patient and aristocrat's widow whose friendship had sustained her through sanatorium tedium. In the clinic's gas oven, a relic of pre-war kitchens, they placed their heads, succumbing to asphyxiation in a deliberate mutual act of defiance. This method, chosen for its swiftness and seclusion, echoed contemporaneous cases. In Demmin, Pomerania, hundreds drowned or gassed themselves amid Soviet incursions. Feodora's motivation, inferred from the era's testimonies rather than direct notes, none survive, intertwined personal torment with geopolitical horror. Her lifelong old story, insomnia, nausea, The void of childlessness had deepened into severe depression, as van der Kiste notes, mirroring Charlotte's decline. The Soviet threat, with its specter of violation and deportation to gulags, tipped the balance. For a woman of her generation steeped in Victorian propriety, such degradations were inconceivable. Her body, discovered the next day by clinic staff, was interred hastily on September 1st, 1945, in a woodland grave near Buchwald, now Kowary, Poland, beside Heinrich's plot. The ceremony, devoid of pomp, was attended by Meta's survivors and a Polish priest, the casket a simple pine amid wildflowers. Post-war expulsion scattered records. The grave, overgrown and anonymous, was exhumed in the 1990s by a German-Polish team led by historians John Ruhl, Martin Warren, and David Hunt, seeking porphyria markers, abdominal pains, psychiatric episodes linking Victoria's line to madness. The DNA analysis proved inconclusive, bones disturbed by grave robbers. Local lore attributes this to post-1945 scavengers. This exhumation, detailed in Ruhl's Purple Secret, underscores Feodora's posthumous marginality. A royal reduced to forensic curiosity, her tragedy emblematic of Silesia's contested memory. In encapsulating Feodora's arc from Potsdam's cradle to Silesia's grave, historian John van der Kiste offers an incisive summation. The princess who longed for children of her own instead had to battle continually with persistent physical ailments, insomnia, and severe depression, and endured many years of ill health similar to her mother. This verdict, drawn from his exhaustive Charlotte and Feodora, distills the themes threading her existence. The unquenched maternal instinct clashing with biological betrayal, hereditary frailties, Porphyria's shadow, amplifying emotional isolation, and a mother-daughter bond poisoned by mutual incomprehension. Feodora's life, analyzed through this lens, transcends personal pathos to illuminate the pathologies of European royalty. Inbreeding's toll, the gendered imperatives of dynastic duty, and the fragility of privilege in modernity's forge. Her childhood solitude under Charlotte's neglect foreshadowed marital disillusion and widowhood's void. Her health odyssey, from arsenic cures to gas oven finality, mirrored the era's medical primitivism and wartime barbarity. Yet amid the despair, glimmers of agency persist. The Golden Jubilee's joy, the hospital's compassion, the defiant pact preserving autonomy. In the grand historiography, from E.F. Benson's Queen Victoria's Daughters to Miranda Carter's Three Emperors, Feodora emerges as the overlooked foil to flashier kin like her uncle Wilhelm II or cousin George V. Her tragic death in 1945's rubble symbolizes the old order's pyre, a princess extinguished not by bombs, but by the cumulative weight of unlived potentials. Her story a cautionary echo in the annals of faded crowns. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.